Hey folks, this is Gadget, and this is a Commodore VIC20. I got one of these for my 10th birthday, and it was the first computer I ever owned. And it's really what got me into computers in the first place. More to the point, it was this that got me into computers, which was the user's guide. Everything that Commodore did with this machine was aimed at making things friendly. And at the time, this was 1982, computers weren't friendly. Computers weren't even in the home much at this point. Now, there were a few machines out there, but it was mostly business stuff, right? And there were a few machines you could get, but it wasn't an everyday thing. It hadn't really taken off for anybody yet. The only thing that was maybe in more people's homes was something like, say, the Atari 2600, which was just a gaming machine. And even that was pretty revolutionary for its time. But the VIC-20 kind of took some of the ideas of what Commodore had done with the PET, which was a computer they had made before this, and the fact that things were just getting cheaper and easier to build and smaller, more compact. The change in computer technology in the late 70s and early 80s was just mind-blowing. So you went from big, large integrated boxes into this. One of the things that throws people off when they see these things today is the form factor, the shape of it. Most people take a look at this and say, oh, that's a cool keyboard. What sort of a computer does it connect to? But this is the whole computer. You have here some ports on the side. This takes a standard Atari joystick. You have a power switch here, and you have power input, power light here, keyboard here, so you could type and enter programs and stuff. Programming was a major piece of how you interacted with this thing. I'll say a little bit more about that later. And on the back, you had a number of ports. This big slot here is a cartridge port. They realized that if they really wanted to make something friendly, people needed to be able to play games on it. And the way you played games at the time was with a cartridge. You pop things in and things would be stored on a ROM chip, and it would just quickly boot up and take you directly into the game. Then here we got a couple more ports. This is your video and audio port. Typically at the time this would connect to an RF modulator, so you could connect that to a TV, but it can break out standard composite and regular audio and a couple other things coming out of there. And this is a port for a floppy drive, which I never actually owned one of those. What I did have was what plugs into this port, which is a data cassette. We actually used audio cassette tapes to store programs at the time. And the data cassette plugged in here, and you fast forward and rewound your tapes and loaded your programs, and it was, quite frankly, a pain in the butt, but it got the job done. And then lastly, you got the user port here, which I never messed with. Main thing people plugged into these was modems back in the day. But this thing actually works pretty well. It is very, very limited, even by the standards of the time. It had a whopping 5 kilobytes of RAM. Yeah, not megabytes, kilobytes. And a 1 megahertz 6502 processor, which, as you might imagine, is not lightning fast. The big thing it did come with was what's called the VIC chip. This is a chip that was developed by MOS Semiconductor, which was owned by Commodore at the time, for doing video and sound. Video-wise, it was just text output, 22-column text. But you could do a lot of things with it. A lot of games end up feeling graphical, but they're actually text-based. And it also had 3-voice audio output plus a white noise generator, which was quite good for the time. Most other computers around this time period were making just simple beeps, if any sound at all. And this thing was actually able to play music. And they had you doing that with the user's guide here. very quickly through the guide, they got you immediately into writing programs for this thing. And the first thing they start with is the whole concept of you can't break it. And it's all about experiment. Take a look at the examples in the book and experiment on your own. And most of this book is honestly a programmer's guide, but taught in very friendly and approachable ways. So you have whole chapters here on how to drive the sound chip to make music, how to send data into it, how the voices on the sound chip work, all of that sort of thing. I kept this book by my side for what seemed like forever, and worked through all of the examples, and then at a certain point started writing my own programs based on what I had learned from their programs, up to including just simple games and things like that while I had the machine. So it was a lot of fun. So yeah, this particular machine was actually, when I started restoring computers, the first machine I got my hands on. Spotted it on eBay, it had a good price, and picked it up, and the person selling it had no idea if it was even working. And when I first plugged it in, it was mostly working. I could get a picture out of it, but it was really dark. So I cracked it open and started taking a look, and what I immediately found was that the power regulator inside had gone bad, and voltage was too high inside, so I immediately replaced that voltage regulator. I put in a more modern part that generates a lot less heat, so that was a nice savings versus the linear power regulator that had been in there before. Then I found that I could get the picture quality up by just there's a small adjustment to adjust the brightness of the output, so that was easily fixed. A few little issues with some clock timing that I still need to work out, but it's still very, very usable at this point. A big question is, why would Commodore build a machine like this? They wanted to build a machine with broad appeal. They saw the potential of what a home computer could do. They saw some of the success that Apple had been having with the Apple II series at the time. How that was taking off in education and business, but also starting to get some traction in the home market. And then they saw what Atari had done with the 2600, also known as the VCS, in terms of bringing a home entertainment device into the home. And they took some cues from both of these and decided to build this machine. They also had this VIC chip just laying around. They developed it in 1977, and it was more of a chip looking for an application. At this point, there weren't many people making use of it, and so they decided to build this thing. The cool thing about it is it connects to a TV. You can use game cartridges in it, and I'll show you in a few minutes some of the cool games it can play. It actually uses the same controllers as the Atari 2600. So if you had both, you already had a 2600, you could just plug those controllers right into this and make use of it as well. They continued that path on the Commodore 64, which came out a few years later. The big thing was the price point. I mean, at this point, people were shelling out thousands of dollars for an Apple II. Some of the other comparable machines at the time were going for well over $1,000. Atari had been making some progress with like their Atari 800 line that was a little less expensive, but no one had really introduced a machine at a $300 price point before that was just designed from the ground up to be friendly and usable like this was. And so it was a big seller for Commodore. It was the first computer to sell more than 1 million units. A few years later, I built the 64, which was a huge success. By some measurements, still the most successful computer of all time. So yeah, let's power this thing up and see what it can do. Okay, so here we are. So let's take a look at what's going on the screen here. So it says basic V2, 3583 bytes free. Yeah, that's really 3583 by 3. This whole machine has 5K of RAM installed inside. And once you have BASIC up and running and whatever RAM allocation is needed for the BASIC system, it only leaves you 3.5K free for your programs. For simple programs, that's fine. You could expand that through the cartridge port. You can get up to, I think, I can't remember, somewhere in the realm of 30K installed on this, but there's weirdnesses with how that's mapped in memory and how usable it is. This being an 8-bit machine, it only has a 64K address space, and this isn't doing any of the cool tricks that some of the other machines out there were doing with being able to swap sections of memory out and do paging and things like that. This doesn't do any of that sort of thing. So yeah, you've got a machine with 5K of RAM running a blazing 1 megahertz 6502 processors. This was not a screaming machine. But yeah, this is what you came up to, and you can type in programs, just the normal thing, and classic start program here, and you run that, and there you go. Another interesting thing, don't know how well it's going to show up on video, but you've got these additional characters on the screen, which you can access by pressing different key combinations. You can switch from caps to lowercase by pressing Commodore Shift. But yeah, holding some of these key combinations can give you additional characters. And these common characters were used for doing a lot of the basic games as well. So you could like make a maze with these. You could build block walls. You could do side scrollers, all sorts of things like that, using just these simple characters that were baked into the machine. So yeah, let's put in a game and fire this up and show how it works a little bit doing that. So what we've got here is a modern cartridge for the VIC20. This is the penultimate plus cartridge from the Future Was 8-bit. Includes a lot of their own titles as well as some classic games. Also includes RAM expansion, so this explains how much RAM. So it looks like this maxes out at 35K of RAM available and where it can be mapped, that sort of thing. Different RAM mappings that are required for different programs. So if you're running a program off of cassette or floppy or something like that, they may require different RAM expansion patterns. Or you can set it expanded, whatever. This card is kind of cool because it just comes up with a menu. And then you go in here and you hit games. And then you can go through the list. So I'm going to take a bit and I'm going to show you some of the games that I played when I was a kid. First one's a game called Amok. Starts with a text screen, introduces basic instructions. This one's interesting because most of the games you start by pressing this F1 key. This one actually starts with F8, which I kind of found interesting. It's the only game I know of that does that. You tap that and, oh dear, my joystick does not see, oops. There we go. So I can move around, and as the text is a bit blocky, but this is doing some of that custom character stuff that I was talking about earlier. Like the bullet is a character, right? And then all of the walls are just block characters. But this is kind of similar to some of the other games of the late 70s, early 80s, like say Berserk or Robotron, where you're navigating a maze and robots are shooting at you. Initial pacing starts off pretty slow, but this can still get a little challenging. Basically, you earn points by taking out these robots, and then going through any of these exits will take you to the next level. Different color robots are worth different numbers of points. So these little blue guys, green guys, sorry, are not worth very much. I think they're 5 points apiece. But then you move to the next level. Now we're into blue robots. Oops, I missed. These guys are a bit more aggressive. They're also worth 10 points each as opposed to the 5 that their robots in the previous levels were worth. You don't have to kill all the bots in order to get to the next level. One of the good strategies here is actually to race through the levels with the low point robots and then spend your time on levels like this where you have, got shot. And then when you get shot, you start over at the lower levels again. But the red robots are worth quite a bit more than the blue or the green robots. The highest scoring robots at all are the black robots, which I did not get to. So let's see if I can get to them this time. Oops. You'll notice as bullets get close, the things they get close to actually change color, which I always found interesting. And it's because of that character mapping that I was talking about earlier. It actually ends up creating a single character that has a bullet and whatever it's near in it. And then, but that can only ever be a single color, and so you get some weird color things happening. Oh, that hit the wall. Let's take a look at some of these. Gorf is one of my favorites. I spent hours playing this game. And it's actually several games in one. So you start with this Space Invaders-like thing. It's kind of interesting because you can actually shoot at the enemies as they're setting up. It has an interesting mechanic. There was a lot of games at the time that had limitations on your fire rate. And with this, you can fire as fast as you want. But if you fire before your bullet hits something, it deletes your old bullet, which is an interesting trade-off, because if you mash the button too fast, you end up not hitting anything because your bullet never has a chance to get to its target. But if you miss, you can fire again without having to wait for your bullet to strike whatever it's going to strike. So we go from this Space Invaders themed thing to something based a little bit more on Galaga or Galaxian. Trying to talk and play at the same time is a skill I haven't quite developed yet. But once you take care of that, you get into this space warp thing. And this is basically a bonus level sort of thing. You just have to survive, and you can score points by shooting things, but you don't actually have to shoot them in order to pass the level. And then in the end you get this flagship level, and interestingly, like, the shield is reversed here. It's protecting the flagship instead of me. And when you hit the flagship, if you hit anywhere other than that red dot in the center, you just knock out a small chunk, which then falls down and tries to hit you. Your goal is to hit that tiny little dot in the center where the red is, and since you're taking chunks out, you can expose more of the ship over time. And it gets lower and starts Firing faster the more time you take. Or you can die like that. And I just bit the dust. So anyway, that's Gorf. Mega Race is fun. Obviously inspired by Asteroids. But different mechanics. You don't have the whole shattering thing going on. Those smiling guys turn into much faster enemies. If you let them go too long. I often find the best approach is to just bounce up and down like this if you can. And then I died again. But the pulsing sound effect here has always been cool in that it picks up speed and builds tension. So that's it for the VIC20. If you like what you see, give a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Anything you'd like to see, other games you'd like to see me try out on this thing, or other machines you'd like to see me explore, just let me know. And until next time, see you around.